I'm Mark Callahan, Mr. Saltwater Tank, coming to you on behalf of saltwateraquarium.com. Part of regular tank maintenance-ish is a water change. Now I say ish because water changes are something that you want to do when your tank tells you that it needs a water change. You don't want to just do a water change because you're like, hey, I need to touch my tank, therefore I'm going to do a water change. You've got better things to do with your time. You want to do a water change when your tank says, hey, I need a water change, and that's easy to do. You just have to learn how to listen. Now, I got your back on that one. I'll teach you how to do that in this episode. Now, that being said, why do we even want to do a water change? Here's why. Water changes are mainly done to reduce or to boost tank parameter levels. For example, let's say your calcium is 380 parts per million. You know that when you mix up a fresh batch of salt water, that calcium level is going to be 440 parts per million. So by adding in higher levels of calcium into your tank through that water change, you're boosting the level of that calcium parameter. Now, water changes can also be done to reduce tank parameters. For example, let's say your nitrates are 50 parts per million. You know that if you do a water change with freshly mixed salt water, the nitrates in that salt water should be 0 or very close to 0. So then we can then bring down that 50 parts per million nitrate level by doing a water change with near 0 nitrate level salt water. The old saying is, dilution is the solution to pollution. But unless you do a large water change, you won't have much dilution effect. Here's where nano tanks have a big advantage over their larger reef tank brothers and sisters. Doing a large water change on a small nano tank like this 10-gallon water box behind me is really simple. All I have to do is take out 5 gallons of water and put 5 gallons of water back in. That might take me 30 minutes. Contrast that with a 50% water change on my 1,000-gallon reef. That's a 500-gallon water change. Part of the challenge there is, where do you keep 500 gallons of water? Then you have to make all that 500 gallons of water salty, pump out 500 gallons of water, and then pump it back into the tank. That's a lot of effort. That's a real pain in the tail, as opposed to a 50% water change on this little water box here. There are a couple other reasons to do water changes, and those include sucking out nuisance algae or lightly vacuuming your sand. Those reasons are different than boosting or reducing tank parameter levels, and they're still worth mentioning. So how do you do a water change? First, you're going to need to know your tank parameters. Measure your salinity and measure the temperature. Then, mix up your new salt water outside of the tank. Never add salt to a tank with animals. Ideally, you want to use reverse osmosis deionized water for your water change. That's water that's been made super clean by running it through an RODI system. Now, I realize not everyone has an RODI unit. Not everyone wants an RODI unit. If that's you, I got you covered. There's a couple options for you. First, you can buy RODI water from your local fish store. Local fish stores often sell it by the gallon. You can walk in with your 5-gallon jug, get your RODI water, and walk out the door. Another option is to use filtered water. A lot of times this is just RO water. This is water that you see sometimes sold outside of grocery stores. That can work as well. Now what you want to be careful about is distilled water, because distilled water can be condensed on copper coils, and copper kills invertebrates if you had them in your tank. Invertebrates being shrimps, snails, crabs, corals, things like that. So distilled water, not worth it unless you're absolutely sure that it was not distilled on copper coils. Now, the last option is to dechlorinate tap water. This is simply getting water out of your tap, adding a dechlorinating product to get some of the nasties out, and putting it in your tank. That can work. Word of caution here is it's going to depend on how clean your tap water is, because tap water is inherently going to have some stuff in it, and that stuff can fuel algae outbreaks in your tank. So if your tap water is really clean, it can work for you, and I found a lot of times tap water is just dirty enough that it's going to cause issues in your tank, and it's not worth it. So there's a range of options for you when it comes to choosing water for your water change. Just don't forget that you're going to need some kind of water. Then add some salt, add your power head to mix up the salt, heater if needed, and then wait 30 minutes. Check your salinity and then adjust accordingly. If you need to add more salt, now's the time to do it. Just keep in mind, you can't take out the salt once you've added it, so go slow. Once the salinity and the temperature in your water change bucket match your tank, now it's time to do a water change. Turn off all the pumps, and now's a good time to clean the filters in the back of your tank. and know by cleaning the filters it's not going to crash your tank. Remove some water from your tank, taking care to avoid removing fish or inverts. You can add water back into your tank via a bucket, which usually makes a mess, or you can pump it back in with a pump like in our water change kit. No mess, no heavy lifting, just let the pump do the work. Once the tank is full, plug back in your filters and check over everything. Water changes have their utility around a saltwater tank, and I only like to do them when the tank tells me that it needs it. Remember, simply doing a water change to do a water change is a waste of time. Now what about regular water changes? Because I do those on some of my older tanks. Well, I do it because the tank tells me that it needs it. I know that over the course of the time frame, usually a week is when I did my water changes, water parameters would drop and I would need to boost them with a water change. Now I learned that by testing my tank's water and look at the results. So I could see that in a week time, I need to do a water change to boost those levels back up. So I knew that once a week is when I needed to do my water change. But even though I'm doing my weekly water changes, I still know that I'm going to be testing my tank's water, and it may come a time when I don't need to do those water changes at all, or I have to do them every 2 weeks or once a month. It all goes back to listening to what your tank tells you and then responding. I'm Mark Callan, Mr. Saltwater Tank, coming to you on behalf of saltwateraquarium.com. I'll catch you in the next episode. I'm thirsty, maybe I can...